Hi, thanks so much for tuning in to this latest episode of Leadership Lean In. And I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you enjoyed our Redeemer Online this last Sunday, particularly the interview with Andy Fadaju. If you didn't watch that morning, we continued our Pray For Me series, but also had this interview with Andy, who is the leader of Elim, church in Worthing, just particularly about race and everything that's going on surrounding George Floyd. I'd really encourage you to watch that. Also, I hope you saw a couple of, well, it's actually one video in two parts that I sent out through the planting groups about how I think we should consider responding to everything that's going on in the US and our own nation regarding George Floyd. If you've not watched that, I'd really encourage you to watch it. If you've not had it, hassle your planting group leader for it. They've got it. And so just encourage you to watch that about how we should be thinking, how we should be responding, how even we should be responding as Redeemer, and just some thoughts on that, that really tragic unfolding of events over there, but what it's highlighted about us and about our society. Just to say that before I tell you what's coming up in this episode, that this week we've obviously got the reading plan continuing. I hope you've been enjoying that. You should have your planting group, which we've heard from so many people how much they're enjoying that, and that's such a key thing we're doing as Redeemer at the moment. On Thursday, we're continuing back into Leviticus in digging deeper. So if you've been tracking with that, if you want to just dive in, you could dive in now, to that, because I think we're starting a whole new section of Leviticus. If you haven't seen Steve Myersco's last two Digging Deeper episodes, well, they're broken into lots of different videos on money, I'd really encourage you to watch that. But we're back in Leviticus this week, and it's just been like I've just looking at Leviticus 17, 18, 19 and 20, just looking at the sacredness of life, the importance of the family, how we should think about sexuality, how we should think about issues of injustice, particularly everything that's going on at the moment with George Floyd, but also the very serious issue of abortion. There's kind of all of that and more in Leviticus, certainly 18 to 20, also 17 as well. So if you want to know anything and more about some of those things, we're going to be tracking through that together over the coming Thursdays. And this coming Sunday, we've got the last part of our Pray For Me series before we dive back into the Pioneers after Father's Day. So really looking forward to finishing that series off. Also going to have a great morning with all sorts of different things going on that morning. So love you to tune in for that. So this week, we have got an extra special Leadership Lean-In. I did an interview a couple of weeks back with Terry Virgo, who is the founder of Newfrontiers, which, although is slightly confusing, is the kind of movement of churches that Regions Beyond, the family of churches that we're a part of, has come out of. So Newfrontiers isn't really particularly a thing anymore, but kind of evolved and kind of transitioned to lots of different kind of smaller church families. We're in Regions Beyond, led by Steve Oliver. There are 250 odd churches around the world in Regions Beyond, but Terry's the kind of guy who was right there at the beginning, founding the whole thing. Such a fantastic man of God, so much humility, so much grace, and it is an unbelievable privilege that I got to steal 25 minutes of his time to ask him questions. So this is going to be about his reflections on the coronavirus, his reflections on starting a new church, which we're obviously doing at Redeemer, his reflections on how to build a rhythm and habits and disciplines in your life that feed your relationship with God, not sap them. So this is just a gold, 25 or so minutes. So really looking forward to it. I don't know, make sure you've got your coffee ready and enjoy the next 25 minutes with Grandpa Terry. And I'm sure you'll appreciate everything that he's got to say. Okay, well, it's nice to see you, Terry.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to come and talk with me. It's a real privilege. So I just wanted to ask you some questions, if that's all right. The first one was just around the rhythms and habits. So we've been talking with people a lot and encouraging people to think through the rhythms and habits of their life, particularly in this season where priorities and the rhythms that we get into have all been thrown up in the air and life looks different. There's homeschooling and working from home and not leaving the house, and so all of our standard rhythms have kind of gone by the wayside. And I just really I want to myself, and I want to encourage people in Redeemer to establish some rhythms that are really going to help their life in God flourish and going to be able to put things into their life which can really help them connect with God and grow spiritually and grow in their faith. And so I was just interested to know, be fascinated to know what rhythms you've put in place over the years and what you found helpful and not helpful to help your own relationship with God grow.
Okay, well, thanks, Alex. I think just to say immediately that we're kind of committed strongly as a grace movement. So it's very important always when you're talking about rhythms or disciplines of life that you never move off of grace ground. You never abandon the acceptance we have in Christ, that's free, it'll never change. And any rhythms or disciplines we put in place are not in order to earn his favor or to gain merit or somehow become acceptable. We must never drift. It's very possible when you start talking about disciplines for us to drift into a kind of legalistic approach. And people talk about means of grace, but really what they mean are these are the rules you must keep.
Right.
And I think it's important that we don't go there. We say, no, I know I'm accepted. I know if I miss my rhythm, I'm still righteous. It's not going to make me more acceptable. It's so important that we get that clear. Otherwise, you're talking about something that will tie you in knots horribly. So we always keep that ground, that we are accepted in the beloved. We don't have to impress God in that way because we're hidden in one who's absolutely impressed him. So having said that, so we're not legalists, but if we don't take on disciplines, we can just grow immature. I've been looking in the book of Proverbs lately. It talks about the simple man, the sluggard. It talks about the wise man, etc. And really, there are things that are helpful to build in. So for me, you asked me about my life. I try to make time regularly to be in the Word. So my day starts in the Word. I've had all sorts of different approaches to coming to the Word. At the moment, I'm going through Ephesians. I virtually take a verse a day. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 verses if it opens up that way. But I worked right through Philippians before that. Now I'm going through Ephesians. And these days I do it with a commentary, which is something I have taken on board more recently. That's not been my life pattern, but I found it interesting. So I have a little journal. I write my notes down. I write down what I think God's saying to me through it. And then also more recently, I guess we have more time at the moment, I've got a very big fat commentary on Luke. I've just been through Darrell Bock's commentaries on Luke, which are stunning. Through the 2 volumes, they're both big and fat. It took me months. And I've just finished and I've just started the book of Acts, and it's just as good. So I also, if I have time, I dip into that as well. So I do that in the morning. Then I have breakfast, and then I pray after that. So my prayer life, it begins very much with worship and a celebration of God's grace. I sing a lot in my prayer time. I come before him with singing. I come with thanksgiving. I come thanking him for what happened the previous day. Events that kind of gets me, earthed in things that have actually happened. But that brings me on to the God who oversees everything. And I find myself singing songs. I sing in the Spirit. I speak in tongues quite a bit. So the first part of my worship, of my prayer time, is a worship time every day. I will worship for quite a long time. I will sing songs that come to mind, usually old songs, but they're full of terrific truth. Usually, songs that do celebrate Jesus and draw me to him so that I can celebrate my standing before him. And then that spills over into prayer and intercession. I tend to use the Lord's Prayer as a kind of backbone or structure to my praying. So I start with, your name be hallowed. I'm praying for God's name to be glorified. Often mingled in there, I'm praying for revival. I want God glorified. And I know that in the end, that is the answer to everybody's need. If God were glorified, inner city problems would be solved.
Yeah.
Because we glorify God, we don't give thanks, we don't make room for God. And then, for his kingdom to break out, his will to be done, and so on. So I don't slavishly go through that, but it's a kind of structure which I tend to use most days. So that's kind of the pattern.
And is
Very
there,
often,
sorry, is there
yes.
a reason that you start with going through something in scripture and then punctuate it by breakfast? I assume that's just because you're hungry, but is there a reason that you don't pray like straight off of the back of your Bible reading time, or mix the two? Is there a reason you separated the two in that sense?
I think it's just evolved. I can't remember when or how that all came about. I've been around a while. I find when I first wake, a cup of tea over an open Bible, I find it's a good way to wake up. After I've had breakfast, I probably feel more alive, more awake. I just find that works for me.
And so when you, I remember listening to Joel, your son, talk about waking up in the morning and coming downstairs, I assume when he was reasonably young, and hearing you singing in the front room or something like that, which always kind of inspired me. When he talked about prayer, he'd often just talk about, your life of prayer as well as his own. What would you say if people have got young children, and so the distractions of life at the moment? I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old, and so I try and get up. What I've tried to, my children were getting up quite early, so I was trying to beat them up. So my starts have got earlier and earlier to try and to find time before they're up. But what would you say to parents of young children who are trying to find that kind of time? But I don't know, how did you do that, and have you got any advice for them?
Well, it sounds like you're on a similar path to the one I was on. I think I must have been doing it the other way around in those days when the kids were young. We had 5, you may know, and I would be up early. I mean, the kids have joked with me over the years now that I don't remember them saying it at the time, but apparently they would say to Wendy, "Why is Dad so noisy in the mornings?" But I would be praying. I must have done that first in those days, and I would be singing and celebrating. And as you say, you kind of beat them. You get up earlier. When I wanted to truly be a disciple of Christ, which I was by no means when I first got saved, I was a terrible mess. But when I meant business, I thought I need to pray, and I used to catch the 7:37 to London, so I just had to get up earlier in order to have my prayer time, in order to then breakfast and get the bus to the railway station, go and get the train. So I just got used to getting up early. Yeah.
And when you're in your time praying, if things come to your mind, which happens a lot to me, so I start praying, and maybe sometimes I've taken that from you and used the Lord's Prayer as a bit of a loose guide, and it starts well, I'm a few minutes in, but suddenly it pops into my mind, I've got to speak to that person, I need to prepare that thing, and I find my mind, I'm still praying with my words, but my mind is kind of just floating off somewhere else. Do you have that, and how do you try and make sure your time praying is actually prayer and not just thinking about your day? Or
Sure. No, I think probably everybody is vulnerable to that. I keep a piece of paper and a pen nearby, and a pen. So if something comes to mind, I quickly write it down and leave it, so that I can come back to it later. I mean, that happens quite often. So something will come to mind. Oh, I've got to phone that person, or I mustn't forget to do whatever. And I just write it down quickly and leave it. So I've just, I've done that over the time. Yeah.
And just one last question on this subject, something that just popped into my mind. What do you do, and even you must have had this, when you don't want to pray? So you wake up in the morning for some reason, and you're not, I don't know, you're not feeling like in the mood, something bad's happened, something's dominating your thinking. What do you do in those circumstances apart from constantly remembering what you said at the beginning about grace and I can have a lie in and Jesus still loves me?
I think that for me, I would tend these days simply to go on anyway. I would. I think I read Gordon Fee on the Holy Spirit. I think he's a terrific writer on that thing. And he talks about the gift in Romans 8. He talks about praying with prayers that can't be uttered. He makes a case for that being the gift of tongues in Romans 8. And he says it's given to us in our weakness. And he said, speaking in tongues isn't something to boast about. It's a gift given to weak people to help them in the overlap of the ages, which Romans 8 talks about. And that really helped me, that when I don't feel like praying, then I will pray in tongues even more because my spirit begins to gradually come alive when I pray. I will just do it. And I think I read something that D.A. Carson wrote, which I think is a Puritan quote about praying yourself into prayer. So I think, Jesus said men ought always to pray and not to give up. And I think giving up is something we sometimes feel about prayer. I can't do it. I give up. I'm not there today. I think we do better to just press through. And I found tongues terrifically helpful in that situation because sometimes your mind is distracted. Sometimes you just feel you can't engage. And I think it's a bit like the psalmist, you see, where are you, soul? I've got up. Where are you? Why are you cast down? Where are you? And then, I'm trying to remind myself all the time of God's wonderful grace to me. I'm singing songs that say that, songs that remind me that it's all free. I find I helped that Ephesians 5 passage about be filled with the Spirit, singing to yourselves. I know it's plural probably, but you can handle it as an individual. Singing to yourself in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. I find as I sing some of these great songs that talk about his love for me, my spirit starts waking up. And sometimes I'll sing those songs in tongues. I'll just take the melody and use the gift of tongues. And I find my spirit begins to engage. So that would be my portion most. This morning, I had a real pain yesterday. I had an unpeculiar phone bill, which I didn't understand at all. It's like £100 more than it's ridiculous. I mean, I only have £20. And I tried to get through online to O2. Well, nothing happens. Then they say, go on our website. You chase yourself around in circles with passwords and this, provide your password. Oh, you've forgotten it. We'll send you a thing now. So you've got to find it. You lose where you started. It's just absolutely desperate. And I just, I wasted ages. I felt bad. And I woke up this morning thinking about that. And I thought, oh, blow it. I'm not going to give in to that. Because I just need to overcome it. Because it came like a cloud on me. I thought, this is such a time waster. And you owe these people money. They take it out of your account. You can't do anything about it. And I really kind of inwardly troubled. I thought, this is going to mess up my prayers. So I just deliberately kind of came against it by singing and praising and enjoyed fellowship with the Lord.
That's really helpful, Terry. Thanks. And so just on another subject, this is obviously a really strange time. And I don't know if you've ever known a time quite like it. I'm sure big events have happened in your lifetime, but where we're kind of all locked in our homes. It's very odd. I just wonder whether you've got any reflections in this time, and especially as we start to look like we're coming out of it a little, although who knows what that'll look like. Reflections about maybe things that you've learning about yourself, or reflections on the church maybe, or even just on our culture. Like, what are there any lessons that you think that we should be taking out of this, or things that we should be learning, or things that God is saying?
Well, when you say probably been through something like it before, I keep on hearing the word unprecedented, and I think it really is. I've never known anything like it. I don't think our generation has. So it is. I think it is unique. I think for me, I think everyone's different. For some people, it's extraordinarily busy because their job, they're still working. They're working from home. They've got children around them. They're having Zoom calls where the sound suddenly goes, and it can be hugely frustrating. Whereas for me, although normally my life's very busy as a preacher, I am in a different place to most people in that I no longer have responsibility. I ceased having responsibility for a church or for Newfrontiers about 15 years ago. So although my diary was absolutely full, and I should be in Portugal now, I've just cancelled Vancouver, California. I've got a whole year of travel, not one free weekend, very, very busy. But I haven't got responsibility other than speaking at those things. So they've all gone. So for me, it's a bit different to most people, I think. Each day follows another day. So you've got to be careful about the kind of, gosh, here we go again. You know, it's a Groundhog Day kind of thing. So I think the need for the sort of thing you've just been asking me about just gets underlined, really. That, as I was saying, just yesterday was totally frustrating. And when it goes frustrating, it kind of piles the whole thing on you. You think, well, life is frustrating at the moment, kind of thing. And it's a path you could go down. And so it's a clear refusal. I'm not going down that road. And I think there have to be these disciplines. Otherwise, the mood can take you. I don't want to be taken by a mood. I want to overcome that. So I do think these disciplines are important at this time. For me, I have more time to pray. And though that's not everybody's situation. They've got children all around them, or they've got their job still to do from home or whatever. For me, I have more time. So I'm delighted I can have another prayer time later in the day, particularly praying for revival. And then when we talk about this situation, people think, is it the devil and all the rest of it? Well, it does look ugly in every way. But I believe in a sovereign God. And I do truly believe that God is involved in all this. And I think that people are maybe for the first time shaken free from all the other things that seem to supply security. Many are losing their jobs, many wondering how they're going to cope, many wondering about life and death in a way that we normally never ever think of. So I'm praying a lot that God will use this as a preamble to a genuine revival. And I have heard, prophetic voices that I believe. I don't believe in kind of saying God's going to do a revival in 2020. This is the year. I've never felt able to do that. Over the decades, I've never led Newfrontiers that way. This is the year kind of thing. I don't think it's right. But I do believe we can have a growing hope for, an anticipation of. And I do see in that kind of context that it's a moment when even our Prime Minister was on the edge of life and death. And I think he speaks a bit differently. And I've heard some testimonies of Christians who were very much on the edge of life and death. A pastor from Northern Ireland, you may have seen the story on Facebook, just breathtaking story. And the man's come out of it. I mean, when he speaks, you just feel, wow, this guy has met God in this. And I feel that it's a great opportunity for people to be humbled and asking questions. And I'm amazed. I heard a few days ago that The Guardian reported that a quarter of the population have been tuning in to churches online. And I hear all over that the numbers of people tuning in to churches online is phenomenal. And I was talking to Scott Marks in Zimbabwe last week, and he said their life groups have doubled in size. Doubled. Wow. And, around you hear all kinds of stats about how the numbers. Now, I know a lot of Christians are jumping around looking at other churches and so on, but it does sound like there are people asking bigger questions. I think we should pray into that. I certainly am praying into that and believing that God is on the move. But I truly believe we need to see it an invasion of the Holy Spirit. And so I very much for that to be our experience.
I saw that Guardian article as well, and one of the other things it said was that there's a kind of resurgence of either talking about prayer or prayer, and so how, you know, it gave, I can't remember the figures it came up with now, but a huge number of people have been praying, and it kind of gave the top like 5 prayers, which was interesting. And we're just about to launch as a church a kind of mini campaign called Pray For Me, where we're going to produce lots of different videos of key workers in our church who are asking for prayer themselves, which then we're hoping to invite the community into and kind of tap into this resurgence of an acceptable spirituality, and do something off the back of it, helping people think about prayer from a person's perspective who's never been to church before, and they might use that language a lot. And a lot of people were saying, who I knew, like, pray for Boris. And it's just interesting, you know, you hear cabinet ministers saying that, and you think, I wonder what they mean by that. I wonder if they had to articulate who they're praying to, what would they say? And I think it's a unique opportunity, isn't it? I've never known that in the last, you know, few years, how open people are to talking about the concept of God and prayer and life and death.
I've noticed Tim Farron, the guy who formerly led the Liberal Party and then got himself in a twist and resigned because he was a Christian and found he was getting compromised. He has now come through stronger and stronger as a Christian testimony. It's beautiful to see some of the things he's saying now. So I often pray for guys who are in those positions, who will maybe have access to people we wouldn't have access to. Just one more thing I would simply say about the broadcasts. I think we're gradually learning, aren't we, how to do it. I say we, I don't have responsibility, but I think people are gradually improving, doing better and better things, because it's the world. And I was just reading in Acts, as I mentioned, I'm going through this commentary on Acts. And one of the things I noticed he said was the testimony of their corporate life was part of their witness. It wasn't only preaching, the testimony of their corporate life. And I thought that's very interesting. And I've looked in at the Brighton broadcast, I suppose you call it, last summer. I've noticed they're broadening it. They've made it a different style. So they've more like a television magazine program. It's got good preaching, it's got some work, but it also talks about their work among the homeless, the feeding of people, and I thought, hey, that's very good, because you can open the eyes of people. It's not just our preaching, but that's so important. And worship, I think worship's difficult, singing to a camera, and I wouldn't cut it out, but I think actually maybe using opportunity for testimonies, conversation between people, just seeing the way people are together. I think people are very lonely in the world, and their concept of church is, you know, Bishop of, I don't know, Vicar of Dibley or whatever it is. They haven't got a clue what church is. And so to see ordinary people laughing together, chatting, coffee, and talking about Jesus, I think, wow, I never realized. I think that could be something we should incorporate more and more. And it sounds like you're thinking of creative things already, but I just mention it.
No, that's really helpful. And actually, that's kind of links into the last thing that I wanted to touch on with you, which is we've just started this church, Redeemer, in the last 4 weeks from when we're recording this, and we're just trying to really think, I guess particularly because of the season, how can we creatively engage with people that don't know Jesus, witness about Jesus, and in the ways that you were talking about. If you were I guess directly involved in helping us, overseeing what we were doing, or you yourself were starting a new church, what would be some of the things that you'd be looking for in, I guess, the early months, let's say, of signs of health, and think just things that you would want to see that would encourage you early on?
Yeah, I as I say, I'm just reading the birth of the church in the Book of Acts. I just find it so exciting, catching the overwhelming sense of the presence of the Holy Spirit is just phenomenal. Obviously, they were experiencing many signs and wonders, etc. And that's one of my prayers, that when we come out of this, we might see a multiplication of those things.
Mm.
But I think it was a community. It says they were held in honor by all the people, and no one dared join themselves to them. But the Lord was adding day by day those who were being saved. And they were a recognizable people. They were distinct and different. And I think that our journey has been quite a strange one in many ways, that when we first started what subsequently became known as Newfrontiers, it was pretty difficult at the beginning. And I was saved into a Baptist church, which would have been regarded as a good Baptist church, terrific pastor, big crowd. But to be honest, it was just a place you went to. And no one ever talked about discipling. I don't remember anyone getting involved. You know, these days people talk about marriage preparation. I mean, unknown. Anything speaking into someone's life. Home groups were unknown. It was just a big Sunday event. Then when we started the new kind of churches, what we got started with, it was very radical. And I hated the whole democratic thing that was in my Baptist background. And I was invited to a church, what they call a business meeting or something, and everybody shouted at one another. It was unbelievably awful. Although the Sunday meeting, the pastor was beautiful and the preaching was fine. But I thought that when I began to see what church was like under the surface, I thought, this won't do. We've got to build a church based on honest relationships with genuine integrity and respect for leadership. And so we started, a guy called Richard Hayden Noel was in one of the first churches that already existed in London, and asked could they join us, because Newfrontiers started as house churches all around Sussex and began to grow. And a guy in London said, hey, can I become involved? And he had a church. And I started getting involved, helping him transition the church. It's the one now that Steve Timmett leads. But when we got started, he wrote a little booklet called How to Join the Church. And the first half was about conversion, really. And the second half was about joining a local church. And it was just superb. And so he just wrote it for his own church. And I thought it was so good, we started to encourage other people to use it. In the end, we published it, just called it How to Join the Church. Our danger was, I think we became a bit introspective. We were so concerned to get the church right that we were not very evangelistic. A prophecy very early on about mending the nets. And I felt God, when I became a pastor, we started doing evangelism, went to coffee bar evangelism and rest of it. And we had prophecy on mend the nets, get the nets right. And I felt God was saying, sort out the church. Because you can't keep people. People get saved, they go through the net. So that we gave ourselves to sorting out the church. And then I think we got quite a big wake-up call. Hey, don't forget what nets are for. They're to throw out among the fish. And we began to become much more evangelistic. And I think years have slipped by. And that, I don't know many churches now that do anything like an 8-week commitment course. It's so much easier to just join. And I think people join not necessarily knowing what we're trying to build. Where you could only join having gone through that. And everybody joining would have a conversation with the elders at the end, saying, yeah, I embrace all the values, I appreciate them, be with them. And so we built, I think, a very good foundation. I think sometimes now you've got people in and you're still trying to win them. Whereas I think for us, the gateway in was a bit more difficult. And so people came in understanding we're coming into something, and we were on a mission, and there was a terrific sense of corporateness. We're doing this thing, which led to the Bible weeks and the whole thrust. I feel sometimes these days we've just become a little casual. So, and you got people coming who, you see, when we started, we were small house churches. Now, for many of us, we've become the biggest church in town. You know, I remember Hastings being 14 people. I remember Eastbourne being 24 people. Brighton, you know, we started with 35 people. And that's the biggest church in town. So it becomes popular, and you join the popular church. And I think, for me, if you're starting all over again, I I would bear in mind some of these things. Let's really talk out. Who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the call that's on us? It talks about being built on an apostolic prophetic foundation. What's the burden we feel? What are we called to be? And I would really spend some time in that and not drift into, oh, here we go again. We changed our name. I think it's a great time, great opportunity to say, why are we here? Why does God want another church? Why did God up? What are we here for? And I'm living with a big vision. It'd be great to articulate that and get people on board with that. And when I came through the Holy Spirit movement, a man called Ern Baxter preached on David and Saul. It was a very prophetic message, and it talked about Saul, and he said he was head and shoulders taller. You may remember, and he called him a head and shoulders man, mental thinking, human strength, and then David was the man after God's heart, and then he talked about how people who were with Saul went over to David, and God built another kingdom, and Saul's kingdom faded, and David's kingdom grew. And we lived with that kind of vision at the beginning. God was building a new kind of church, and there was a lot of flack in the 70s and 80s, a lot of hostility towards us. And then there was a kind of breakthrough in terms of our acceptance, which was great. But at the beginning, things like worship, what we were doing was radically different. Now you'll find, in nearly every church now, the worship's changed. It's more like us, but it isn't necessarily very charismatic. It's just contemporary, and people can confuse whether they have guitars, so they're charismatic. And I think we need to push through for more life in the Spirit.
That's really helpful, Terry. No, thanks so much. And we've been talking as a new leadership team for a little while about, even before we started, about why we were starting this church, what God was saying to us about the purpose of it, the reason for it. And so we're just about to, we started it all of a sudden. We kind of felt prompted by God to do it, but we're just about to start talking about what we're calling pioneer membership. So what does it mean to be part of this church plant for the first year to 2 years? And what are we looking to do together? What do we feel like God's spoken to us about? And what does it look like to be a part of Redeemer? So it's really encouraging to hear you say, clearly spell out the vision that God's given us, and be quite, particular at the beginning about what we're building and what it means to be part of the church. Because I really feel strongly that to carve something out of nothing and to start something from scratch takes a disproportionate amount of, if I say effort, I obviously mean joining with the Spirit in it, but just like a D-Day landing, they had to throw so much resources to take this kind of small little worthless bit of beach, but that kind of opened up the whole thing. And so we're just trying to talk to people about it in those terms, that there's got to be this is what it means to be part of Redeemer in this season, because God has got a big call on it. We've got a big call on us. So it's really helpful to hear you articulate that. Thanks so much for your time, Terry.
Okay.
And speaking to me, speaking to us, and lots of love from us to you and Wendy. And I'm sure you're looking forward to, I'm sure your diary will start getting busier again as soon as we're allowed out, and you'll find all that free time just dissipates through your fingers. But lots of love from us, and thanks so much for your time.
Well, it's good to see you. My love to the church. I know so many of your people. My love to you all.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Terry. Wasn't that just fantastic having Terry with us for that period? I was so grateful to him. I thanked him on your behalf, and do pray for him and Wendy. And they've just done a remarkable job and have been so fruitful, so used by God, but such a humility about the man that I just absolutely love, and it's such a privilege to get time with him. Have a fantastic week, and see you at different things going on this week, particularly next Sunday for Pray For Me Part 3, Redeemer Online, Redeemer Kids at 9:30 before that. Have a great week. See ya.